All right, let's get to it. James Mennie over at the Montreal Gazette. So Jim spoke to Sébastien Dallaire earlier. That Léger poll shows times are bad and getting worse for the CAQ. What's your headline is it time to stick a fork in the CAQ?
Absolutely, because I really think that they're done. But the crazy thing, Aaron, is 2 days ago, reporters are asking Legault, are you going to stay on? Of course I'm going to stay on. I'm going to run for a third term. The job isn't done. Well, what's done is the CAQ and François Legault. But what's crazy, and I know we sort of have to admit this every now and then on the show, we have another 16 months of this before the election. This is how, and the only way they're going to go is down. There is no sort of light at the end of the tunnel of, if only the CAQ could do A, B, and C, and they'll be out of this mess. The fact is, the same survey says, what do you expect from the next election? 63% of respondents say a change in government, okay, which is, I don't know, that's a pretty clear message. And the last time I saw that big a chunk was back in 2018, in the wake of the 2018 election that saw the CAQ being elected for the first time. Léger did a survey, and they asked, respondents, why did you vote for the CAQ? And even though the CAQ keeps denying this, they don't mention it because they pretend it's all kinds of other reasons, the number one reason, I think, was more than 70% of respondents said it was time for a change between this endless feud between the PACs and the Liberals. Now, all that said, the poll that dropped today has an interesting suggestion. It says that if Pablo Rodriguez, based on what it's hearing from the respondents, if Pablo Rodriguez becomes leader of the Provincial Liberal Party, they will move into first place, albeit just 1 point ahead of the PQ. I'm not entirely sure that's going to be on the money, and I think what's really important in that is when you look at the subsample that they questioned, that the respondents who identified themselves as Liberal Party supporters on that question, more than half of those respondents said, I don't know who I'd support as leader for the Quebec Liberal Party, which quite frankly, Aaron, given that we're almost precisely 4 weeks away from choosing the Quebec Liberal Party leader, does not bode too well. But I mean, we'll see what happens. But yeah, I think I wanted to say next year. I say by Labor Day, you and I and our listeners will be looking at perhaps a very changed dynamic in Quebec politics, and one which I think is not going to really sort of play itself out until the next election in October.
When you mentioned that, and I mentioned that when I spoke to Sébastien Dallaire, I said, you know what, you can have a short memory in politics if you want, but look exactly what happened to the Liberals and Conservatives. That didn't take 16 months to play out. That played out in just about 2 or 3 months, right? From a 25 or 30%, almost 30% lead and being considered dead to suddenly winning a federal election. So yes, it's early, but to your point, Jim, about François Legault sort of feeling the heat enough to say, I'm not going anywhere. What do you make of that? That's usually the kind of thing you wouldn't necessarily address. So obviously, he knows where these polls were going.
Oh, absolutely. And to stick with your example, I was about to say, well, the federal election is the exception that proves the rule. The fact is, the issue on the federal election, and I'll kind of echo what I said about the 2015 election with Harper and Trudeau. I don't think that Mark Carney won the election so much as Justin Trudeau lost it. The idea was they had to get rid of Justin Trudeau. And that's what changed it. It wasn't some magical thing on policy. And indeed, we're finding out today, much to my dismay, that there seems to be a bit of a tendency to stall on the part of this new Carney government when it comes to certain, economic moves, as in, tabling a budget. But all that said, I think we're looking kind of at the same kind of situation where you've got, if you take François Legault out of the equation, will the CAQ survive? And I think whereas if you ask that question about Trudeau and the Liberals, the answer would be yes, because the Liberals predate Justin Trudeau and Pierre Trudeau. The CAQ is François Legault. Yeah. And it would be very, very difficult, I think, and I'm sorry. I mean, personally, maybe he's a fine fellow. But François Legault is sort of standing up there as one of the most disliked politicians, not just in Quebec, but in the country. So, I mean, he's got a real big challenge. And I understand. I get it. You got to turn around and say, yeah, I'm going to stick to my guns. I'll run the next election. But when you consider that behind him, who's left? I mean, who would take over if he were to disappear tomorrow? The bench isn't that deep, Aaron. And a guy like Monsieur Dubé, our health minister, he's leaving politics. He's not going to run again. So where do we go? And Geneviève Guilbeault, I'm not entirely sure she would even want the job. So I think the door is kind of wide open. It's really, I think, for the first time in a long time, there is going to be a huge amount of pressure on the electorate itself to make a very conscious and informed decision as to who's going to form the government after October of 2026. Simply because, the PACs, to their credit or not, are being quite frank and saying we're holding a referendum on independence. How much of that Quebecers are willing to swallow in this day and age? Back in the day, it was like, yeah, sure, well, I'll vote for you, but you're never going to hold a referendum. We don't know that's the case. And given what's happening south of the border and given what's happening around the world, I think the last thing any Quebecer is going to want to have is even the uncertainty of a referendum. So, are the Liberals going to take this by default? Will the Conservatives, will Eric James Conservatives come up from the middle perhaps and surprise us all? Who knows? But you know what? If a week is an eternity in politics, well, how long is 16 months, man? There's a lot that can happen.
By the way, just, if I think about the idea now that the PQ are in a lead, so they gained 3 points in this one because the CAQ fell. Don't we always go through this when the PQ do well and they just decide, wow, we're doing better than we thought. We better not talk about separation or a referendum?
Yeah, but the problem is, Monsieur Saint-Pierre Plamondon has been so adamant about sticking to his guns, about not even, they kept their mouths shut during this whole idea, during the federal election, which was clearly a referendum on who could deal with Trump, and it was a Canada versus U.S. thing, and even Yves-François Blanchet discovered that, we can't turn around and talk tough like our former separatist selves because the actual real world has intruded. Will that change between now and next October? I'm not entirely certain it will. And even if it does change, I think the electorate itself will have fundamentally changed here in Quebec. I think the how can I put it, the perspective of voters in Quebec really has been broadened by the events of the past few months, and we realize as much as some would like to believe, we all live in this little imaginary fork created by Francois Legault, and the rest of the world is against us. We're a part of the world. We are subject to the vagaries of the world and the vagaries of who they choose as president south of the border. So I don't know. I have a sneaking suspicion that collectively the Quebec electorate may well find itself growing up sooner rather than later, and a lot of the tried and true fallbacks for all the mainstream parties in Quebec may have to be revised.
So let me go to something else that I can't believe we're still talking about. The election's been over for a week, and the Terrebonne riding, the on-again, off-again, I won, you won, no, I won vote, is now, of course, back in focus because this one woman proudly holding that envelope where she said she was going to vote for the Bloc, but the envelope was returned to her by, I guess it was Elections Canada. What has to happen here next, Jim?
I think the only thing that can be done to salvage this, and I know people will turn around and complain, and I'll address that in a second, you'll have to hold a special election. Do not hold this idea of a coin toss, this idea of pulling a name out of a hat. No, let's not do that. As it is, the reputation of the system is downright wobbly. People will say, yeah, but if you do that, people will say, well, look, the Liberals are the government. It's an edge for the Liberals. Well, that's the way, the cookie crumbles, my friend. But the fact is, you cannot let this hand. You cannot pretend this is normal. Even with one vote, it would have been bad enough. But the idea that there was this other ballot that was seemingly returned uncounted in error to an elector, you know what? Turn it off, turn it back on again, hit the reset button, and let's start from scratch, because this will never go away unless you do if you do otherwise.
So you're talking about having everyone in that riding in Terrebonne go back and vote?
Yeah, listen, come on. We're not asking them to build a great wall around the riding. It's a matter of saying, call the election, call a special election. I don't know, schedule it for July something, give people 60 days, whatever. Have advanced polls, do all of that, but really you have got to try and salvage this, because right now the election in the federal riding of Terrebonne I can only describe as a fiasco. And listen, for all we know, tomorrow somebody else is going to step forward and say, oh yeah, well, what about my ballot? Yeah. So you've got to nip this in the bud. It's just going from bad to worse.
All right, let me ask you the question that I started the show with today. This is another poll conducted asking Canadians, what do you think, two-party system, is that the way to go? Or should we continue to have, various parties all running for office here? When you look at this last election, roughly almost 90% of the vote was split between Conservatives and Liberals. Yeah. Maybe we just have them. What do you think?
Well, listen, you and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and the fact is we're already headed towards a two-party system. And in fact, if you look at this country's history, we've spent far more time having a two-party system than having more than a pair of parties running against each other. I think right now it's a matter of ideology. It's a matter of people sort of gravitating to whatever party they feel is speaking to their concerns. But by all means, if you want to float another party anywhere at any level, by all means, the more the merrier. That's what democracy is all about. But is it healthy to have a two-party system? Take a look at our friends south of the border and see what's going on there. I would say it's probably better off for all of us in this country if we have more ideological choices when we go to the ballot box. But if it comes down to voting either blue or red, guess what? It wouldn't be the first country where that's happened.
James Mennie at the Montreal Gazette. Thank you, Jim.
Demain.